Mister, are you my dad? That question hung in the air, thick with the hospital's disinfectant smell at 2:47 in the morning, like a bullet driving straight into Knox Mercer's chest. He stood rooted to the floor, staring at the two 7-year-old girls trembling in front of him, long black hair brushing their shoulders, gray eyes like the Chicago sky before a storm, the exact eyes of the woman he'd been searching for 7 years. Your voice sounds like the recordings on Mom's phone, one of them whispered, her words shaking. The saved messages Mom listens to whenever she cries. Knox's hands started to tremble. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man who made the entire underworld bow its head, was trembling because of two 7-year-old children. Two beautiful, terrified children who'd called him in the middle of the night because their mother had suddenly collapsed. They were looking at him as if he held every answer in the world. And maybe he did. Maybe the answer was already written across their faces, in the hard angle of a jaw, in the way they tilted their heads when they thought, in the stubborn look that refused to cry even while they were afraid, just like him. "We think," the other one spoke up, her voice threaded with a fragile mix of hope and fear, "we think you're our dad." And Knox Mercer, mafia boss, man who held the lives of hundreds in his hands, felt his empire beginning to crumble, because the math was too simple. 7 years old, 7 years ago, the truth was too clear. And the woman who'd vanished from his life 7 years earlier without a single explanation had been carrying his children when she ran. But I'm moving too fast. Because to understand how a midnight phone call could resurrect a love story buried for 7 years, you need to know how it all began. You need to know about the night Alara Sinclair's world fell into darkness, about the woman who worked 3 jobs to raise her children, who gave up every bite of food so her 2 little ones could eat, and who still listened to the voice of the man she loved every night before she fell asleep, even though she'd left him behind. And you need to know about 2 small, brave daughters who quietly found their father's phone number and made a decision that would change the lives of 4 people forever. If you've ever had to face a truth you weren't ready to accept, stay with me, because what happens next will break your heart and then stitch it back together in ways you never saw coming. Press like if you believe in second chances. Share this with someone who needs to hear this story. And subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the stories that touch the heart. 30 minutes before that moment, the small apartment on Chicago's South Side was still sunk in silence. Alara Sinclair pushed open the worn door, the hinge giving its familiar squeal in the late-night quiet. She'd just finished her shift waiting tables at Tony's, her feet aching after 8 straight hours on her feet, the smell of grease and food still clinging to her faded black uniform. The cramped 1-bedroom apartment greeted her with the pale yellow glow of a table lamp Luna had forgotten to turn off. Her 2 daughters were sleeping soundly on the double bed they'd shared with their mother for 7 years now. Black hair spilled across the pillow, faces peaceful in sleep. Alara stood still and watched them for a moment, her heart tightening with love and with guilt. These children deserved more than this. More than an apartment with cracked walls and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. More than dinners where their mother had to pretend she wasn't hungry so they could have the food. More than the life she was able to give them. Alara untied her apron, and her eyes drifted to the small table in the corner where a stack of online graphic design books still lay open. She'd completed 60% of the course, stealing every rare free minute between 3 jobs to study. In the mornings, from 5 to 9, she cleaned office buildings. In the afternoons and evenings, she waited tables. On weekends, she babysat for the neighbors, all of it to raise her 2 girls, and to save for her own small dream. Beside the stack of books sat an old leather-covered notebook where she'd written down plans for opening Sinclair Bakery, recipes she'd tested, cost calculations, rough sketches of the shop she imagined, and on the last page, one number had been underlined: $2,340. 3 years of saving every spare coin, every small tip, every cut she could make. That money would have been more if she hadn't been robbed last month on her way home at midnight. They'd taken every dollar from her wallet, nearly $400 in tips she'd saved all month. Alara hadn't called the police because she knew it wouldn't help. She'd simply started again, quietly, the way she'd been starting over for 7 years. She moved softly to the bed and picked up the exercise notebooks her girls had left on the nightstand. Luna had finished every math problem in neat, careful handwriting, and she'd even added a small note. "I did the advanced ones too because the regular ones are too easy." Alara smiled. The child was frighteningly smart, always asking questions, always analyzing, always trying to understand the world through her own logic. Violet's notebook was the opposite, filled with little scribbles in the margins, flowers, houses, and a family of 4 holding hands that she'd drawn again and again, more times than Alara could count. 4 people. Always 4. Alara traced that drawing gently, pain blooming sharp in her chest. Violet had never stopped dreaming of a father. Alara set the notebooks down and went into the tiny kitchen to prepare breakfast for the next day. When she opened the refrigerator, she saw there were only a few eggs left, a little milk, and bread that was close to its expiration date. She'd have to go shopping on her day off. She'd have to recalculate this week's spending. She'd have to try harder. She reached up for the pan on the high shelf, and that was the moment the world began to spin. Alara blinked, trying to focus, but the tiny kitchen seemed to tilt and sway around her. Her head throbbed, her ears rang, and her legs suddenly didn't have the strength to hold her up. She tried to grab the edge of the table, but her hand slipped. The world collapsed in a single instant. Alara's body hit the cold kitchen floor, her head striking the corner of the wooden cabinet with a sickening sound that echoed through the sleeping night. She lay there, motionless. Dark brown hair spread across the worn tile, eyes squeezed shut. In the bedroom, Luna sat up first. She was a light sleeper, always alert even in sleep, as if 7 years of uncertainty had taught her she could never fully let go. The strange sound from the kitchen made her heart kick hard. "Violet," Luna shook her sister. "Wake up. Something's wrong." Violet's eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep, and before she could understand anything, Luna was already pulling her out of bed. The 2 girls ran into the kitchen, and the sight in front of them froze them both. Their mother was lying motionless on the floor, a thin smear of blood spreading from the wound on her forehead where she'd hit the cabinet corner. "Mom!" Violet screamed, tears spilling instantly. She threw herself beside her mother, shaking the unconscious woman. "Mom, wake up! Mom, please!" Luna stood there for 1 second. Only 1 second. Long enough for terror to rip straight through her 7-year-old heart. Then something inside her shifted. Someone had to be strong. Someone had to act, and that someone would be her. Luna drew in a deep breath and ran to grab her mother's phone from the table. Her hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver as she dialed 911. "Emergency," she told the dispatcher, a steadiness in her tone that felt almost unreal for a 7-year-old. "My mom fell in the kitchen. She's not waking up. There's blood on her head." She gave the apartment address clearly, word by word, answering every question the dispatcher asked, while Violet sat beside their mother, sobbing as she kept shaking the unconscious woman. "Mom, wake up. Mom, please. I'm so scared. Mom." Violet's crying was heartbreaking, but Luna didn't have time to cry. The dispatcher said an ambulance would be there in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It sounded like an entire lifetime. Luna ended the call and dropped to her knees beside her mother, placing a hand on Alara's chest to feel her breathing the way she'd been taught in the first aid class at school. Still breathing. Mom was still breathing, but 10 minutes was too long, and the 2 girls were too small, and the apartment was too empty. Luna looked around as if she might find an answer somewhere in the room, and that was when she remembered. "Violet," Luna called to her sister, and something in her voice shifted. "Do you remember the number we saved in Mom's phone last week?" Violet lifted her head, eyes swollen and red, tears still sliding down her cheeks. The number of the man in Mom's box?" Luna nodded. A week earlier, when their mother had gone to work the night shift, the 2 girls had accidentally found the box hidden in the deepest back corner of her closet. A small wooden box packed with secrets. There were photographs of a man with blue-gray eyes that looked cold, yet turned strangely gentle when he faced the camera. There were handwritten letters, yellowed with age. There was an old business card with the name Knox Mercer and a phone number, and there was a white handkerchief that still carried the faint trace of men's cologne, even after all these years. The 2 girls had sat together for an hour, turning over each photo, reading every line they could understand. And they'd realized one thing. This man had eyes exactly like the eyes they saw every day in the mirror. This man had features they could recognize in Luna's own face. "This is our dad," Violet had whispered that night, her eyes blazing bright. "This has to be our dad, Luna." Luna hadn't argued. Her logic had fitted every piece into place. Mom never talked about a father. Mom hid that box as if it held something too painful to face. Mom cried every night when she thought her daughters were asleep. And Luna had heard her open her phone, heard her play the same old voicemail again and again. a warm male voice filling the dark. That night, Luna had done something she never even told Violet. She'd taken the phone number from the business card and saved it into her mother's phone, labeling it Knox, not because she planned to call, because she wanted a backup plan, because she'd learned, after 7 years of living on the edge, that there always had to be a backup plan. And now, kneeling on the cold kitchen floor beside her unconscious mother, Luna knew it was time to use that plan. "If he's really Dad," Luna said slowly, holding her sister's gaze, "then he'll come." Violet stopped crying, staring at her sister with a thin, fragile hope. "Do you think he'll really come?" "There's only one way to know." Luna unlocked the phone, found the name Knox, and pressed call. Her heart hammered as she waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Then someone picked up, and a man's voice came through, deep and cold in the night. While Luna spoke to the stranger in a voice that trembled but still tried to stay calm, Violet did the only thing she knew how to do whenever she was afraid. She reached for the notebook and pencil on the table and started to draw. The lines were messy in the pale yellow light. 4 figures holding hands, a woman with brown hair, a tall man, and 2 little girls in the middle. A family. The family Violet had never had, but had never stopped dreaming about. She drew as if she drew it enough times, hard enough, the wish would come true. And maybe, just maybe, tonight it really would. Somewhere else in Chicago, inside a pitch-dark office on the top floor of an upscale nightclub, Knox Mercer sat behind a gleaming black oak desk, the only light in the room coming from a desk lamp and the open laptop screen in front of him. The clock read 2:17 in the morning. But for a Mafia boss, night had never been meant for rest. He'd just finished a tense meeting with his men, settling a territory conflict on the south side of the city without spilling blood. Tristan Cole, his right hand, stood by the door like a silent shadow, waiting for the next order. Knox was reviewing financial reports when the phone on the desk began to vibrate. He glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number with a local Chicago area code. A call at 2:17 in the morning was rarely a mistake. A cold, sudden intuition pricked at the back of his neck, a feeling he hadn't felt in 7 years. For 7 years, he had paid detectives to tear through all of America looking for a woman who had vanished like a shadow, leaving no digital footprint or active phone line that could ever be traced. 7 years he'd woken night after night with her shape in his dreams, and opened his eyes to the emptiness she'd left behind. And now, the silence of his past was being shattered by a mysterious caller at 2 in the morning. Knox picked up, his voice deep and guarded, the instinct of a man used to midnight threats. "Speak," he commanded, though his heart hammered against his ribs for a reason he couldn't yet explain. But the voice that answered wasn't hers. It was a child's voice, a little girl, trembling and frightened, yet trying to stay calm. "Mister, Mom fell. She won't wake up. I don't know what to do." Knox sat up straighter, every thought of business dissolving in an instant. "Who are you? Is your mama Laura Sinclair?" "Yes, sir. I'm Luna. I'm 7. My sister Violet is 7 too. We're twins. Mom fell in the kitchen and there's blood on her head and the ambulance is coming, but I'm really scared. And I found your number in Mom's phone and I don't know who you are, but 7 years old. Twins. 7 years old." Knox's mind did the math at a dizzying speed. Elara had left 7 years and 9 months ago. If these children were 7, that meant they'd been born about 7 years ago, which meant Elara had been pregnant when she disappeared from his life, which meant Knox shot to his feet, the chair skidding back with a loud scrape. Tristan moved instantly, ready to act. "Address," Knox said into the phone, his voice steady again, even though a storm was tearing through him inside. "Give me your address." Luna recited it. An apartment building on the south side, one of the poorest parts of Chicago. Knox signaled Tristan, and he understood immediately, rushing out to get the car ready. "Listen to me, Luna," Knox said, his voice turning gentle in a way Tristan had never once heard in the 10 years he'd worked at Knox's side. "I'm coming. I'll be there in 10 minutes. You keep the phone with you and talk to me, all right?" "Yes." The little voice grew smaller. "Mister, are you my dad?" The question felt like a physical blow to Knox's heart, leaving him momentarily breathless. He couldn't answer, because he didn't know the answer. Or rather, he was afraid of it. "I'm coming, Luna. Keep talking to me. Tell me about your mom." And the little girl told him. For 10 minutes, Knox sat in the car while Tristan drove like a madman through Chicago's empty streets, and Luna told him about their life. About the tiny one-bedroom apartment where the three of them slept in the same bed. About how Mom got up at 4 a.m. to go clean offices. About how Mom waited tables late into the night. About how Mom always said she wasn't hungry so her daughters could have the food. About how she'd been robbed last month and lost all her savings, but didn't cry in front of them. About how she still tried to study online every night even when she was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. Each sentence felt like a crushing weight on Knox's soul, a grim catalog of the suffering he had failed to prevent. Alara, the woman he'd loved like madness 7 years ago, had been living like this. She'd been raising his children, because he was certain they were his, in poverty and loneliness for 7 years, while he lived in silk and power, unaware that somewhere in this very city, his own flesh and blood had been going without, meal by meal. "Mister," Luna's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, Luna," Knox said, his voice catching. "I'll always be here." The car stopped in front of the hospital entrance, and Knox bolted out before Tristan could even turn off the engine. He ran through the automatic glass doors, the sharp sting of disinfectant hitting his nose, the harsh fluorescent light slamming into him after the darkness of Chicago. He scanned the crowded emergency lobby, his heart hammering in his chest, and then he saw them. 2 little girls sat huddled on hard plastic chairs in the corner of the waiting area, small and lost among the adults moving back and forth. One of them was sniffling, clutching a notebook tight against her chest. The other sat with her back straight, eyes fixed forward with the wary focus of someone who'd learned too early how to protect herself. And Knox couldn't breathe. They had long black hair brushing their shoulders, black like his. They had gray eyes like the Chicago sky before a storm, the same eyes he saw every day in the mirror. Their faces were a perfect blend of him and Alara, his stubborn jaw, her soft mouth, the way they tilted their heads when they thought, exactly the way he always did. These were his children. No DNA test, no extra proof needed. Knox knew it in every cell of his body. This was his flesh and blood. He walked toward them, his legs heavy as lead, his heart squeezed tight. The girl who was crying, it had to be Violet, looked up first. Her wet gray eyes met his, and then her whole face lit up as if the sun had risen in the middle of winter night. "You came." Violet sprang up and ran toward Knox, her small feet slipping on the glossy hospital floor. She crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his leg as if she was afraid he might vanish. Knox stood there, frozen for a moment, not knowing what to do. He'd faced the most dangerous enemies in Chicago's underworld without a flicker of fear. But now, a 7-year-old girl was clinging to his leg and sobbing, and he had no idea how to respond. Then instinct took over. Knox slowly dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around her, feeling her tiny body shaking against him. Violet cried into his shoulder, and Knox realized this was the first time in 7 years his heart had truly felt like it was beating. "I'm here," Violet said through her sobs, still holding on to him. "I drew this for you, for Dad." She handed him the crumpled sheet of paper she'd been clutching since they left home. Knox took it, and what he saw made his eyes burn. A hurried pencil drawing, 4 figures holding hands, a woman with long hair, a tall man, and 2 little girls in the middle. Above it, in messy child handwriting, were 2 words, family. Knox couldn't speak. He only held Violet tighter, feeling her tears soak into his expensive shirt. But not both children welcomed him. Luna was still sitting on the chair, not standing, not running to him. She watched Knox with cool gray eyes, assessing, analyzing. Eyes far too old for a 7-year-old, eyes that had seen too much, that had been forced to be strong too soon. Knox held Violet on one arm and stepped closer to Luna. He meant to kneel down to her level, but Luna spoke first. "If you're our dad," she said, her voice not trembling but not warm either, "then why didn't you find us for 7 years?" The question was a sharp sting of accusation that Knox had no defense against. He didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but it wasn't good enough. He didn't know. He hadn't known they existed, but what did that matter to a child who'd grown up without a father? "You're right," Knox said, his voice low and honest. 7 years is too long, and I don't have any reason good enough to explain it. Luna frowned, clearly not expecting him to admit it instead of making excuses. "So what do you want?" "I want to prove it." Knox knelt down, one arm still holding Violet, his eyes locked on Luna's. "I know you don't trust me. I understand. If I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. But give me a chance to prove it with what I do, not what I say. Luna tilted her head, the exact way Knox always did when he was thinking. Prove it how? By being here. By not walking away. By taking care of your mom, and taking care of you and your sister. Knox drew in a slow breath. I'm not asking you to call me Dad. Not yet. You can decide when you're ready. But I'll be here. I promise. Luna stared at him for a long moment, gray eyes picking apart every line in his face. Then she spoke, still cool, but a fraction less rigid. A promise doesn't mean anything if it isn't kept. I know, Knox said, so I'm going to keep it. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't move away either. And for Knox, they sat in the waiting room through the hours that followed. Knox in the middle with Violet curled up in his lap, and Luna beside him, still keeping her distance but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her small body. The doctor had told them Alara had been taken into the emergency room for tests, and all they could do was wait. In the quiet stillness of the hospital, with the time creeping toward 4 a.m, the two girls began to tell him more about their life, and each story felt like a deep cut into Knox's heart. Mom wakes up at 4 every day, Violet said, her voice steadier now that she'd cried herself empty. She cleans offices until 9, then she comes home and takes us to school, and then she works as a waitress until really late. Luna added, her tone calm, almost like she was reading off a report. On weekends, Mom watches Mrs. Patterson's baby next door to earn extra money. Mom says every dollar matters. 3 jobs. Alara worked 3 jobs to raise the 2 children she had given birth to and raised alone. Knox's fist tightened, the pressure in his chest turning into something that felt like it might crush him. Mom always says she isn't hungry, Violet went on, her eyes dropping. At dinner, she only eats a little and then says she's full, so the rest can be for us. But we know she's lying, Luna said softly. Sometimes at night, I hear Mom's stomach growling. She's really skinny, skinnier than all the other moms at school. Knox felt his eyes burn. He was one of the richest, most powerful men in Chicago. He lived in a mansion with meals cooked by a private chef, and meanwhile, the mother of his children was going without food, so they would have enough. Last month, Mom got robbed, Luna continued, and for the first time, her voice trembled. On the way home after her night shift, they took all the money from her wallet, almost $400. Mom cried all night that night, but she thought we didn't know. Violet nodded. Mom has a notebook where she writes down her savings. I saw her cross out a big number after that. She was really sad, but she didn't tell us. Knox wanted to scream. He wanted to smash something. He wanted to find the men who had taken Alara's money and make them pay. But he did nothing. He just sat there, holding Violet tighter, and listened. Mom's studying online, Luna said, and for the first time there was a hint of pride in her voice. Graphic design. Mom says when she finishes, she'll get a better job and we'll have a bigger home. Mom wants to open a bakery, Violet added. Sinclair Bakery. She already drew the whole design. It's really pretty. Knox closed his eyes, trying to swallow the pain rising in his throat. Alara was still Alara, the Alara he'd loved. Still tough, still full of dreams, still refusing to quit no matter how cruel life got. But why? Why hadn't she come to him? Why had she chosen to live in poverty instead of telling him these children existed? He could have given her everything. He could have given them everything. A big home, enough food, the best schools, safety. Instead, Alara had chosen to disappear, chosen to carry it all alone, chosen to let his children grow up in a cramped apartment in the poorest part of the city, not knowing who their father was. Anger flared in Knox, hot and violent. He was angry at Alara for not trusting him, angry at her for making a decision for him, angry that she'd let his children suffer when he had more than enough to give them everything. But deeper than the anger was the pain. Pain for 7 years lost. Pain for the first steps he hadn't seen. The first time they'd said dad that he hadn't heard. The birthdays he hadn't been there for. Pain that the woman he loved had chosen this life instead of a life beside him. Mister? Violet's voice cut through his thoughts. Are you crying? Knox lifted a hand to his face and realized his cheeks were wet. The most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago was crying in a hospital waiting room in front of 2 7-year-old children he'd just met. It's okay, he said, his voice rough. I just wish I'd been here sooner. As they sat there waiting for news about Alara, Knox couldn't stop his mind from drifting back into the past. back to the years that had shaped everything that came afterward. 9 years earlier, he was 28, freshly inheriting the Mercer Mafia empire after his father's death. And Eclipse was one of the most luxurious bars he owned, a polished legal front for the business that truly kept his world turning. Alara had walked into his life on an autumn night, 19 years old, a second-year art student working part-time to cover tuition, and she was unlike anyone Knox had ever met. She didn't lower her eyes the way others did. She didn't flinch when she looked straight at him. She treated him like an ordinary man, not a king of shadows, and it intoxicated Knox from the very first glance. They began seeing each other in secret, because he didn't want to drag her into his dangerous life. To Alara, he was simply a successful businessman in real estate and entertainment. He kept her away from late-night meetings, tense phone calls, the darkness he faced every day. The 2 years they loved each other were 2 years Knox felt like he was truly alive. Alara brought light into a life drowned in night. She painted his portrait, canvases he still kept locked in his office safe even now. She sang while she cooked, laughed when he told ridiculous stories, cried at sad movies, and never tried to hide her softness from him. She was his home. Knox had bought a diamond ring, hidden it in the office safe, waiting for the perfect moment to propose. He had planned everything. A romantic dinner on his private yacht, red roses, and the question he'd practiced hundreds of times in the mirror. But that perfect moment never came. One night, Alara showed up at his office without warning, planning to surprise him with a newly finished painting, and she saw what she was never meant to see. Knox was dealing with a traitor, blood on the floor, a gun in his hand, and a cold, merciless face he'd never allowed her to witness. Alara stood there with wide, horrified eyes, the painting slipping from her fingers, and Knox saw the instant her heart shattered, the instant she realized the man she loved wasn't the man she thought he was. She ran before he could explain. That night she didn't return to the apartment they shared. The next day she vanished, leaving only a short message behind. "I'm sorry, I can't. Don't look for me." Knox tore through all of Chicago trying to find her. He hired the best detectives, used every connection, offered rewards to anyone with information. But Alara seemed to evaporate from the earth. He didn't know that 7 years earlier, only a few weeks after she left, another man found her before he ever could. Raymond Mercer, Knox's uncle, a 50-year-old man with an ambition to control the Mercer empire his nephew now held. Raymond found Alara in a small cafe in the suburbs, where she was trying to rebuild her life, and he brought news that would change everything. Alara was pregnant. She'd only learned it a few days before, and she was lost, unsure what to do. She still loved Knox, even as she was terrified of who he truly was. She was considering going back, telling him about the baby. Raymond destroyed that possibility. He showed her photographs, images he fabricated of a woman and a child murdered, and he told her this was what happened to anyone who brought weakness into Knox Mercer's life. "My nephew doesn't need a child," Raymond said coldly. "In this world, children are weakness, and Knox hates weakness. He already knows you're pregnant. He sent me to handle it." Alara trembled as she stared at the blood-soaked pictures, stared into the eyes of the ruthless man in front of her, and she believed him. She believed him because she had seen Knox that night, cold and brutal, a killer who didn't blink. She believed him because fear blurred her reason. She believed him because she was only a 21-year-old girl, pregnant, alone, and panicked. "Disappear," Raymond said. "Change your name. Vanish. If you show yourself again, I'll kill you and the child in your belly, and Knox won't stop me." Alara ran. She changed her name to Alara Sinclair, taking her mother's maiden name. She lived off the grid, no social media, no credit cards in her own name, no trace that could be followed. She gave birth to 2 children alone in a small suburban hospital, named them Luna and Violet, and swore she would protect them at any cost. For 7 years she lived in fear and poverty, raising her children on meager wages, never daring to contact anyone from her past. And through all those 7 years, she never knew she'd been deceived, that Knox had never wanted to kill her, that the diamond ring still lay in his safe, waiting for a day she might come back. The quick, urgent sound of a doctor's footsteps pulled Knox out of his memories. A middle-aged man in a white coat approached, his expression serious but professional. Knox stood up, still holding Violet in his arms, and Luna rose beside him. "Are you family for Miss Alara Sinclair?" the doctor asked, eyes on the chart. Knox nodded without hesitation. "I'm the father of these 2 children. How is she?" The doctor looked at the girls, then back at Knox, as if weighing how much he should say in front of children. Knox understood and turned to Luna. "Can you watch your sister for a moment?" Luna nodded, taking the drowsy Violet from Knox's arms, and the two girls sat down again a few steps away. Knox moved farther off with the doctor, his voice dropping low. "Tell me the truth, Miss. Sinclair is severely depleted," the doctor began. "Chronic anemia from long-term malnutrition. But the more dangerous issue is that we've found a fairly large ovarian cyst. If we don't operate, it could rupture at any time and cause internal bleeding. We need to take her into surgery immediately." Knox felt the blood in his body turn to ice. "What's the success rate?" "About 75%, the doctor answered honestly. "This is a complicated operation, and her overall health is weak because of malnutrition. But if we don't operate, her chances of survival are much lower." 75%. That meant a 25% chance Alara wouldn't make it. Knox clenched his hands so hard, his nails bit into his palms, close to drawing blood. "Do it. Do everything you can. Money isn't an issue. I want the best surgeon, the best equipment, the best of everything." The doctor nodded and handed him a stack of paperwork. Knox signed every page as temporary guardian, his hand trembling slightly no matter how he tried to control it. When the doctor left, Knox returned to his daughters. Violet had fallen asleep against Luna's shoulder. Exhausted after a night of too many shocks, Luna lifted her head to look at him, gray eyes full of worry, but still trying to look strong. "How is Mom?" she asked. "Mom needs surgery," Knox said, deciding not to lie to her. "The doctor says it'll take about 6 hours. We have to wait." Luna nodded, as if she was used to receiving bad news and facing it head-on. Knox sat down beside them and gently eased Violet into his own arms, so Luna wouldn't have to carry her weight. Luna let him do it without protest. 6 hours of waiting stretched out like 6 years. Violet slept deeply in Knox's arms, stirring now and then to whisper for her mother in her dreams. Every time she did, Knox held her a little tighter, murmuring reassurance he hadn't known he was capable of. But Luna didn't sleep. She sat next to Knox with wide-open eyes, her mind clearly running hard. About 2 hours after Alara was taken into the operating room, Luna spoke suddenly. "What do you do for work?" The blunt question made Knox flinch. He looked at her and saw those gray eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Luna wasn't asking with childish curiosity. She was asking because she was trying to understand who this man was. "Why do you ask?" Knox asked back, buying time. "Because you have an expensive car," Luna replied. "Matter of fact, you have a driver. You got to the hospital at 3 a.m. and 10 minutes after I called. And you look like someone who's used to ordering people around." Knox stared at his daughter, impressed by the way she observed and connected details. Luna was smart. Smart in a way that was almost frightening. "You can lie to me," Luna went on when she saw him stay silent. "But I'll know. I always know when adults lie." Knox drew in a slow breath. He could have invented a story, said he was a real estate businessman the way he'd told Alara 9 years ago. But looking into Luna's eyes, he knew she would see straight through him, and he'd promised he wouldn't lie. "I do dangerous work," Knox said slowly, choosing every word with care. "Work I'm not proud of. Work I don't want you and your sister to know the details of." Luna went quiet for a moment, taking that in. "Do you kill people?" The question hit Knox like a punch to the chest. He looked at his 7-year-old daughter asking him about killing in a calm voice, as if she were asking about the weather, and he didn't know whether to feel heartbroken or stunned. "There are rules I never break," Knox said, not answering directly but not lying either. "I never hurt women and children. Never." Luna watched him for a long time, as if deciding whether to believe him. Then, without another word, she shifted a little closer to Knox. Not hugging him, not touching him, but closer. And Knox understood that was Luna's way of telling him she hadn't given up on him. Knox's phone buzzed softly. A text from Tristan. "Boss, someone's watching. Castellano knows you're at the public hospital. He's asking why." Knox read it, his jaw tightening. Castellano, his biggest rival in Chicago's underworld. If he found out about Alara and the 2 children... Knox typed back fast. "Keep my family secret at all costs. No one can know about them." He looked down at Violet sleeping in his arms, and Luna sitting close beside him. The children he'd just found. He would protect them, no matter what it cost. The first light of a Chicago dawn slipped through the thin curtain of the recovery room, pulling Alara out of the long haze after surgery. She blinked a few times, trying to bring the world into focus as it slowly sharpened around her. The familiar hospital smell of disinfectant, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, and two small silhouettes sitting beside her bed. "Mom," Violet's voice burst out through tears. "Mom, you're awake." Luna didn't cry, but her gray eyes brightened with a relief she couldn't hide. "You scared us so much." Alara tried to lift her hand to stroke her daughter's cheeks, her body weak and aching after the operation, but her heart warming at the sight of them safe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "I scared you." "It's okay, Mom," Violet said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "As long as you're okay." Alara gave her daughter a faint smile, and then her gaze slid by accident toward the doorway of the hospital room. The smile froze on her lips. Knox Mercer stood there, his back against the frame, arms crossed over his chest, blue-gray eyes cold as winter locked on her. 7 years. 7 years she hadn't seen that face outside the old photos she hid in the box. 7 years she'd tried to forget this man while still listening to his voice through old voicemails every night. And now he was here, in her hospital room, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Alara's heart began to race in her chest, and the monitor beside the bed started to beep faster. She tried to sit up, panic rising and catching in her throat. "Knox!" He stepped into the room, each footfall steady and slow, like a panther moving toward its prey. His face was unreadable, but there was something more frightening than anger in his eyes. Control. The chill of a man who'd learned not to let emotion rule him. 7 years, Knox said, his voice low and cold as steel. 7 years you hid my children. Alara trembled, a mother's instinct to protect surging through her. She pulled her girls closer even though pain flared with the movement. "Knox, you don't understand." "Understand what?" He cut in, his voice never rising, but sharp enough that the air in the room seemed to harden. "Not understand why you disappeared without a word. Not understand why you had my children alone and raised them in poverty for 7 years. Not understand why you let my children go hungry meal after meal when I could have given them the whole world." Violet shrank against her mother, frightened, small fingers gripping Alara's hospital gown. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the choking tension in the room. Luna was different. She stepped between her mother and Knox, gray eyes moving from one adult to the other, analyzing, judging. She wasn't afraid. She was watching. "I was afraid of you," Alara whispered, her voice weak but carrying 7 years of pain and fear. "I was afraid you would..." "Would what?" Knox took another step, his jaw tight. "Would kill you? Would kill your children? Do you think I'm that kind of man?" Tears slid down Alara's cheeks. She wanted to explain, to tell him about Raymond, about the threats, about the blood-soaked photographs she'd been shown, but looking into Knox's cold eyes now, she wasn't sure he would believe her. She wasn't sure she deserved to be believed. "We're going to talk," Knox said, his voice final, leaving no room for argument, but not in front of the children. Tristan appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, as if he'd been waiting for Knox's signal. The tall man with the unreadable face looked at the two girls with a tenderness that seemed to come out of nowhere. "Do you two want to go get breakfast with me?" Tristan asked. "The hospital cafeteria has really good pancakes." Violet looked at her mother, not wanting to leave. But Luna, with the ability to read a situation like an adult, stood up and took her sister's hand. "Come on, Violet. Mom needs to rest, and the adults need to talk." She looked at Knox, then at her mother, her gray eyes delivering a clear message. "Don't hurt my mom." Then, she led her sister out with Tristan, and the hospital room door closed behind them. The room fell into a heavy silence. Knox stood by the window with his back to Alara, staring out at the Chicago sky as it slowly brightened. Alara lay in the hospital bed, her body weak after surgery, but she knew there was no avoiding this confrontation. "Talk," Knox said at last, his voice cold. "Explain to me why you left. Why you hid my children for 7 years. Why you let them live in poverty when I could have given them everything." Alara drew in a deep breath, tears already starting even though she tried to hold them back. "After that night, after I saw you do that, I ran. I was terrified. I didn't know how to face you." "You could have asked me," Knox said, still not turning around. "You could have given me a chance to explain." "I was going to," Alara whispered, A few weeks after I left, I found out I was pregnant. I panicked, but I was also happy. I thought maybe this was the reason to come back to you. To really talk. To tell you. Then why didn't you? Knox turned, and his eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with pain. Why did you disappear completely? Alara sobbed. Because of Raymond. Your uncle. He found me before I could come back. Knox went still. Raymond? He knew I was pregnant, Alara said through tears. He came to me and he showed me photographs. Photos of a woman and a child who'd been killed. He said that was what happened to anyone who brought weakness into Knox Mercer's life. What? Knox's voice sounded strangled. He said you already knew I was pregnant, Alara went on, each word tearing at her heart. He said you saw the baby as weakness. He said you sent him to deal with me. He said if I didn't disappear, he would kill me and the baby. Knox stood there, his face drained, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. You believed him? His voice shook. I saw those pictures, Alara cried. I saw you that night, cold and ruthless. I didn't know anything about your world. I was just a 21-year-old girl, pregnant, alone, and terrified. I believed him because I didn't know what else to believe. Knox suddenly spun and drove his fist into the wall beside him. The impact cracked through the quiet room. Blood seeped from his knuckles, but he didn't even flinch. You trusted my uncle more than you trusted me, he said, and the pain in his voice felt like a sharp ache of regret blooming in Alara's chest. You trusted the words of a man you'd met once more than the man who loved you for 2 years. You didn't give me a chance. Not one call, not one question. You just ran and took my children with you. Knox, I'm sorry. 7 years, Knox shouted, losing control for the first time. 7 years I looked for you. 7 years I thought you hated me so much you couldn't even leave one explanation. 7 years I lived with the hole in my chest you left behind. And in those 7 years, my children grew up without a father. My children were hungry. My children went without. My children had to be strong before they were ready because their mother was too afraid to trust me. Alara sobbed uncontrollably, her whole body shaking. She knew she deserved to be blamed. She knew she'd been wrong. But hearing Knox say it out loud, hearing the agony in his voice, she finally understood how much she'd destroyed. I never kill women and children, Knox said, his voice lower now but raw with pain. That's my rule. The one rule I never break. Those pictures Raymond showed you were fake, or they were someone else's. I don't know where he got them, but they weren't mine. Knox, I'll handle Raymond, he said, his voice turning to ice. He'll pay for what he did to you. To my children. To me. Alara stared at him, tears still falling. Will you forgive me? Knox was silent for a long time. His eyes locked on hers with a complexity she couldn't read. I need time, he said finally. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I won't abandon my children. That I promise. Then he walked out of the room, leaving Alara alone with her tears and the weight of 7 years of regret. 3 days after she was discharged, once her body had recovered enough to walk around, Alara made a request that left Knox stunned. I want to see Raymond. Before you do. They were at Knox's mansion, the place he'd brought all 3 of them after Alara left the hospital. Knox looked at her as if she'd said something insane. No way. Knox, Alara said, her voice calm but unshakable. For 7 years I lived in fear of that man. I let him control my life, decide for me, separate me from you and from the life I deserve to have. I need to face him. I need to say what I need to say. Not for you, for me. Knox went quiet for a long moment, gray eyes searching her face as if he was looking for something. Then he nodded, even though worry still sat hard on his expression. Fine, but I'll be right outside, and there'll be cameras in the room. Alara didn't argue. She didn't need privacy. She only needed to stand in front of the man who'd destroyed 7 years of her life and speak the truth out loud. Raymond Mercer was being held in a room in the basement of Knox's mansion, guarded by the most loyal men his nephew had. When Alara stepped inside, the 57-year-old man sat on a wooden chair with his hands tied, but his eyes still held that arrogant look, as if he wasn't afraid at all. Ah, the little girl, Raymond said, his mouth curling into a contemptuous smile. You came back. I suppose my nephew found out the truth. Alara stood a few steps away, spine straight, chin lifted. She wasn't the trembling 21-year-old in that cafe 7 years earlier. She was a mother who'd raised 2 children alone in poverty. She'd survived days she hadn't thought she could survive. She'd become stronger than anything Raymond could have imagined. "You took 7 years from me," Alara said, her voice steady, not shaking, not wavering. 7 years I lived in fear. 7 years I raised my children alone, going without food so they could eat, working 3 jobs just to pay rent. 7 years my children grew up without a father. Raymond shrugged, showing no remorse. "I did what had to be done for the Mercer family. You don't belong in this world. You and those 2 brats are nothing but Knox's weakness." "Weakness?" Alara stepped closer, her eyes flashing like fire. "You think love is weakness? You think family is weakness? What do you know about that? What do you know about loving someone so much you'd sacrifice everything? You only know power and control." "Watch your mouth, girl." "No," Alara said, her tone final. "I stayed silent for 7 years because I was afraid of you. I let you control my life without even knowing it, but today I'm going to say what I need to say." She took another step, looking straight into the eyes of the man who'd ruined her life. "You don't have the right to decide who belongs to whom. You don't have the right to decide what Knox needs or doesn't need. You don't have the right to threaten a pregnant woman and steal the future of 2 innocent children. You think you did it for the family? You did it for yourself. For power. For greed." Raymond opened his mouth to say something, but Alara didn't give him the chance. "I don't need your apology. I know you're not capable of regret. But I need you to know one thing. You failed. Even after everything you did, I survived. My children survived. And now we have Knox. You can't tear us apart anymore." Alara turned and walked away without looking back. She didn't need to hear Raymond say anything else. She'd said what needed to be said. She'd faced the biggest fear of her life, and she'd won. When she stepped outside, Knox was waiting there, his eyes complicated as he looked at her. She gave him a small nod and kept walking, letting him enter the room alone. What happened afterward between Knox and Raymond, Alara didn't know the details. She only knew Knox didn't kill his uncle. Later he told her he didn't want his daughters to have a father who killed family, no matter how much that man deserved to die. Instead, Knox stripped Raymond of everything: money, power, connections in the underworld, honor. He was exiled to a remote rural place, forced to live out the rest of his life in loneliness and humiliation, knowing everything he'd ever had been taken by the very nephew he'd tried to control. And for Alara, that was justice enough. She didn't need Raymond to die. She only needed him to know he'd failed, that she had won. Knox's mansion sat in the northern suburbs of Chicago, a 3-story building with classic architecture, wrapped in a tall iron fence and a strict security system. When the sleek black car rolled to a stop at the gate, Luna and Violet couldn't hide their shock as they stared at the house they were about to live in. "Is this Dad's house?" Violet asked, her eyes wide as coins. "It's so big." Luna didn't say anything, but she studied everything with a measuring look, from the guards standing watch to the security cameras tucked into corners. Knox led them inside, through the vast main hall with its high ceiling and crystal chandelier, up the oak staircase to the 2nd floor where the bedrooms were. He stopped at one door and opened it, revealing a room flooded with natural light from a large window. "This room is Violet's," Knox said. Violet stepped in and went still. The room was decorated in purple and white, with a princess bed draped in a canopy, a cozy reading nook by the window, and, most important of all, a complete painting corner with an easel, palettes, every kind of brush, and dozens of acrylic paint tubes lined up neatly on a shelf. "I know you like to draw," Knox said softly. "I hope you like it." Violet turned to look at him, her eyes already filling. Then she ran to him and threw her arms around him, crying into his chest. "I love it. I love it, Dad." Knox held his daughter, his heart warming in a way he'd never felt before. Then he led them to the next room, Luna's room. This one was completely different, done in blue and white, simple but refined. And what made Luna stop was the enormous bookshelf taking up an entire wall, packed with books from novels to science, from history to mathematics. A high-end chess set sat by the window. Luna didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't run to hug Knox the way her sister had, but she reached out and touched the spine of one book, then another, her gray eyes glinting with something that was almost happiness. And for Knox, that was enough. But not everyone accepted this arrangement with a smile. Alara stood in the hallway, watching everything with an expression he couldn't read. When the girls had gone into their rooms to explore, she turned to Knox, her voice colder than he expected. I appreciate you taking care of them, but I can't stay here long term. Knox frowned. Why? Because I don't need to be rescued, Knox, Alara said, her tone hard. I took care of myself and my children for 7 years. I'm not some weak girl who needs a man to save her. I'm not saying you're weak, Knox replied, trying to keep the irritation rising in him under control. I just want my children to have a better life, and I want you safe. Safe? Alara gave a dry laugh. You mean safe in a house full of guards and cameras. Safe in the Mafia's world. That isn't safety, Knox. That's a luxury prison. You're exaggerating, Knox said, his jaw tightening. No, I'm telling the truth. Alara faced him, gray eyes unyielding. When I'm fully recovered, I'll find a place of my own. I'll keep studying and working. I'll build my life myself. You can see the girls whenever you want, but I can't live depending on you. Knox felt anger flare in his chest. He'd prepared everything, arranged the perfect life for his family, and Alara rejected it as if it were an insult. He wanted to shout, wanted to tell her he could give her everything she'd gone without for 7 years. But he looked into her eyes and saw something familiar. Pride. Self-respect. That was the Alara he'd fallen in love with 9 years earlier. The girl who bowed to no one, not even him. And even though it made him crazy, he respected it. Fine, Knox said, his voice controlled but unable to hide the disappointment. If you want independence, I won't stop you. But the girls stay here. This is their home now. Alara nodded, accepting that compromise. But both of them knew the battle wasn't over. A week passed in Knox's mansion, and slowly everything settled into a new rhythm. Violet adapted quickly, spending hours in her painting corner, creating bright, colorful pictures of the new house, of the wide garden, and of the family of 4 she still couldn't stop dreaming about. She called Knox Dad as naturally as breathing, ran to hug him every time he came home, and told him all about what she'd painted that day. But Luna was different. She kept her distance from Knox, kept calling him Sir, in a voice that was polite but far away. She wasn't rude, she wasn't disrespectful, but she didn't open up either. She was like a small fortress with high walls. Knox didn't know how to climb. Knox tried in every way he knew. He bought Luna the most complex building sets he could find. Advanced science books, children's experiment kits. Luna accepted everything with a courteous thank you, played with them alone in her room, and never once invited Knox to join her. He offered to teach her chess, and Luna agreed with an expression that didn't look particularly excited. They sat across from each other at the chess table in the living room. Knox confident he'd win easily, because he'd played since he was a boy, and had once been one of the better players in the clubs he joined back in college. He was wrong. Luna didn't win immediately, but her opening moves were so precise, they forced Knox into a defensive position he hadn't faced in years. Knox thought it was because he'd been distracted, so he suggested a second game. By the end of the third game, Knox realized he had to play with absolute focus just to stand a chance against his daughter, yet she still outmaneuvered him at every turn. Her strategy was unpredictable, brilliant, and left him struggling to keep up with her pace. Luna didn't act smug or tease him. She simply watched him with calm gray eyes and asked, "Do you want to play again?" As if beating an adult was the most ordinary thing in the world. Knox looked at his daughter with astonishment mixed with pride. She wasn't just smart, she was a genius. But no matter how many chess games he lost to her brilliant strategies, Luna still didn't call him Dad. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Knox sat alone in his study, staring out the window at the Chicago night sky. He heard soft footsteps and turned to see Luna standing in the doorway in blue pajamas, black hair loose over her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" Knox asked. Luna shook her head and stepped inside, stopping a few feet away. She didn't sit, didn't come any closer. She just stood there looking at him with gray eyes that were clearly turning something over. "I want to ask you something," Luna said. "Ask. Why do you want us?" The question came straight and sharp as a blade. Knox looked at her, waiting. "Is it because of inheritance?" Luna continued, her voice flat, but her eyes searching for truth. "I read books. I know rich people usually need heirs. Do you want us because you need someone to inherit your empire?" Knox felt like he'd been punched in the chest. This 7-year-old thought he wanted them for his own benefit, thought he saw them as pieces on a bigger chessboard. "No," Knox said, his voice low and steady. "I don't want you because of inheritance. I don't need an heir. I could leave everything to charity when I die, and it wouldn't change anything for me. Then why? Luna asked, refusing to let go. Knox held her gaze, those gray eyes so much like his. Because you're my children. Because the first time I saw you in the hospital, I felt something I'd never felt before. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew you were part of me. And I want to be with you, not because I need something from you, because I love you. Luna went silent for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his. You've only been here a week, she said finally. You don't know anything about us. How can you say you love us? You're right, Knox admitted. I've only been here a week. I don't know what your favorite food is. I don't know what you're afraid of. I don't know what you dream about. I missed 7 years, and I can't get that time back. He paused and drew in a slow breath. But I'm going to try to earn it, every day. I'm going to learn everything about you. I'm going to be here whenever you need me. I'll prove it with what I do, not with words. And if you never call me Dad, I'll still be here. Because you're my child, whether you want me or not. Luna looked at him for a long time, gray eyes unreadable. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Knox thought she would go straight back to her room, but Luna stopped at the threshold. Good night, she said softly, and then she disappeared into the dark. She still didn't call him Dad, but she also hadn't walked away in the middle of the conversation. And for Knox, that was a small step forward. Over the next 2 weeks, Knox tried to be a good father, in the way he believed was right. He tightened security around the mansion, hired more guards, installed the newest surveillance system, and he put down a rule he considered completely reasonable. The girls weren't allowed to leave the property unless at least 2 bodyguards went with them. Luna and Violet wanted to go to the park. 2 bodyguards. Wanted to go to the library. 2 bodyguards. Wanted to play in the backyard. There was still someone watching from a distance. Knox thought he was protecting his children, but Alara saw it in a completely different light. You're turning your children into prisoners, she told him one night after the girls had gone to sleep. They're kids, Knox. They need to run around freely, play with friends, live a normal life. They aren't normal kids, Knox replied, his voice hard as steel. They're my children. There are people out there who'll do anything to hurt me through them. I can't take that risk. So you'll lock them in a glass cage for the rest of their lives? Alara refused to back down. You think that's life? Violet is asking why she can't go to a friend's birthday like other kids. Luna doesn't say anything, but I see her stare out the window for hours. You're hurting them and you don't even realize it. Knox didn't answer, his jaw clenched. He knew Alara was right, but the fear of losing the children he'd just found was bigger than anything. He couldn't bear it if something happened to them. But the bigger mistake came the following week. The school Knox had enrolled them in held a student art show, and Violet was chosen to display 3 of her paintings. She was excited all week, talking nonstop about how she'd stand next to her work and explain to everyone what each piece meant. She asked Knox at least 10 times if he would come, and every time he promised he would. But on the day of the show, something serious exploded in his world. An important deal fell apart. One of his men got arrested, and there was a risk information would leak to the police. Knox had to handle it immediately. He couldn't delay even a few hours. He called Tristan and ordered him to buy the most expensive art supplies he could find and send them to Violet at school with an apology card. Knox thought that would be enough. He was wrong. When Knox got home that night, Violet didn't run out to greet him like she always did. She was curled up on the living room sofa, eyes swollen red from crying, the expensive art set still sealed in its box beside her. Luna stood near her sister, gray eyes on Knox with something he'd never seen in them before. Disappointment. Violet, Knox said, stepping closer. I'm sorry. I had an emergency. You promised, Violet whispered, not looking at him. You promised you'd come. I waited all afternoon. I kept looking at the door, thinking you'd show up late, just a little late. But you didn't come. Violet, Toys don't replace you. Luna cut in, her voice cold and sharp. Knox turned to his older daughter, stunned by her ruthless bluntness. You think sending an expensive box erases the fact that you didn't keep your promise? You think toys can replace you being there when Violet needed you? Is that how you plan to be a father? Every question was a painful reminder of his failures, stripping away his pride piece by piece. He looked at Luna and realized what he was seeing wasn't anger. It was confirmation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to prove she was right not to trust him. Mom is busy too, Luna continued, her voice still ice. Mom works 3 jobs, so tired she can barely stand. But she never misses anything important to us. Never. Because she knows what actually matters. Knox stood there, silent, looking at his daughters. Violet was still crying softly on the sofa. Luna stood like a guard, ready to fight for her sister. And Knox understood he'd been wrong. Not only wrong about today, but wrong about the way he'd been trying to be their father. He'd thought money and things could make up for absence. He'd thought protection meant control. He'd thought love could be shown through expensive gifts instead of presents. He'd been wrong about all of it. Knox slowly knelt in front of Violet, bringing his eyes level with his daughter's tear-soaked eyes. "Violet," he said, his voice rough, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. No job, no meeting, no problem is more important than you. I forgot that, and I hurt you." Violet looked at him, her lips trembling. "Really, Dad? Really?" Knox said, lifting a hand to wipe the tears from her cheeks. "I promise you, from now on I'll never let work be more important than you and your sister again. Never. And this time I'll keep the promise." Violet studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could trust him one more time. Then she launched herself into Knox's arms, holding him tight and sobbing into his shoulder. Knox held his daughter, feeling her small body shake against him, and he swore to himself he would never let this happen again. He looked up and saw Luna still standing there, watching. She didn't speak, didn't smile, but her eyes were a little less cold, as if she was giving him another chance. That night, after the girls had fallen fast asleep, Knox stood alone on the second-floor balcony, staring out at a Chicago sky scattered with stars. He heard soft footsteps behind him, and didn't need to turn to know who it was. Alara came to stand beside him, a small space between them, but close enough to feel the other's warmth in the cool night air. "I saw what happened this afternoon." Alara spoke first. "The way you apologized to Violet. The way you knelt down in front of her." Knox didn't say anything, waiting. "That was the first time I've ever seen you like that," Alara continued, her voice gentler than it usually was. "The first time I've seen you admit you were wrong and truly regret it. You've changed so much, Knox." "I had to change," Knox replied, his eyes still fixed on the distance. "I lost you once because I wasn't good enough. I don't want to lose the girls for the same reason." They stood in silence for a while, the night breeze sliding through Alara's hair. Then Knox spoke, his voice low and far away, as if he was talking to himself more than to her. "After you disappeared, I kept our apartment for 3 years. I didn't rent it out, didn't sell it, didn't change a single thing. I went there once a week, sat in the chair where you used to sit and paint, and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe I hoped one day you'd open the door and walk in like nothing had happened." Alara turned to look at him, her eyes wetting. "You kept that apartment for 3 years?" 3 years, Knox nodded. "Until Tristan told me I had to let go, that you weren't coming back. I sold it, but I kept every painting you ever made of me. They're still in my safe." He paused and drew in a slow breath. "And I didn't love anyone else. 7 years, Alara. I tried dating a few times because I thought I had to keep living. But every time I looked into another woman's eyes, all I saw was you. I compared them to you and they were never enough. No one was." Alara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. "I didn't love anyone else either," she whispered. "I was too busy raising the girls, too exhausted to even think about romance. But the truth is, I didn't want anyone else. I still—" She stopped, as if searching for the courage to say the rest. "I still listened to your voicemail every night. 7 years, Knox. Every night before I fell asleep, I played the old voice messages you sent when we were still together. Your voice was the only thing that lulled me to sleep, the only thing that made me feel less alone." Knox turned to her, his eyes full of pain, and something else Alara didn't dare name. 7 years? 7 years, she nodded. "The girls don't know. I only listened after they were asleep. Sometimes I cried while I listened. Sometimes I just lay there and imagined you beside me." Knox stepped closer, until only inches separated them. "Are you still afraid of me?" he asked, his voice dropping. "After everything you saw, after everything you know about me, are you still afraid?" Alara lifted her gaze, her gray eyes meeting his in the dim light of night. "No," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that after everything that happened, you'll never forgive me. I'm afraid I destroyed everything between us and there's no way to fix it. Knox lifted his hand, gently touched her cheek, and wiped away her tears. And then he bent down, his mouth meeting hers for the first time in 7 years. The kiss was soft, slow, as if they were both afraid the other would vanish if they moved too fast. It tasted like salt and tears, and the sweetness of what had been lost and found again. When they pulled apart, Alara searched Knox's eyes for the answer to the question she couldn't bring herself to ask out loud. "We aren't okay yet," Knox said, his voice rough. "I still need time to process everything, but this is a beginning." Alara nodded, a small smile blooming on her lips for the first time in a long time. "A beginning," she echoed. And that night, for the first time in 7 years, they both slept well without old voicemails or paintings locked away in a safe. The days that followed passed in a kind of quiet peace, as if life had finally decided to smile on this small family. Knox spent more time at home, eating breakfast with the girls every morning, driving them to school and picking them up afterward. He still ran his empire, but he'd learned to delegate more, letting Tristan handle what could be handled. Violet bloomed like a flower finally given enough water. She laughed more, painted more, and her drawings were now drenched in bright color instead of the gloomy shades she used to use. Luna still didn't call Knox Dad, but she'd begun to start conversations with him about the books she was reading, about the hard math problems she solved at school, and sometimes she even invited him to play chess, even though she still won nearly every match they played. But happiness in Knox Mercer's world never lasted long without being threatened. One Saturday morning, while the family was eating breakfast in the dining room, Tristan walked in with his face gone pale. He was holding a small wooden box wrapped carefully in black paper. No return address. "Boss," Tristan said, voice tight, "someone left this at the gate last night." The cameras didn't catch a face. They were fully covered. Knox stood up, the instincts of a Mafia boss snapping on at once. He motioned for Alara to take the girls out of the room, but before she could react, Violet stared at the box with innocent curiosity. "What kind of present is that, Dad?" she asked. Knox didn't answer. He took gloves from Tristan and opened the box, and what he saw inside made the blood in his body boil like lava. A porcelain doll with long black hair to the shoulders, eyes painted gray, so eerily like Luna and Violet it was terrifying. The doll's neck had been cleanly severed, exposing the hollow inside, and beside the doll were 2 photographs. Luna walking through the school gate, Violet sitting and drawing by the window of her room in this mansion. The pictures were close, sharp, showing the photographer had been watching them for a long time and could get frighteningly near. At the bottom of the box was a scrap of paper with messy handwriting. "Such a pretty weakness, Mercer. Be careful you don't lose it." No signature, but Knox knew immediately who it was. Vince Castellano, his biggest rival in Chicago's underworld, the man who'd been waiting for a chance to bring him down for years. And now he'd found Knox's weakness. Knox went feral. He hurled the box to the floor and slammed his fist into the wall with a crack that made the whole room jump. "Tristan, call everyone in. Now. We hit Castellano tonight." "Knox." Alara stood, her voice hard. She'd already pulled the girls behind her, Violet trembling in fear while Luna stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the broken neck of the doll on the floor. "Alara, this isn't your business," Knox snarled. "He threatened my children. He dared to threaten my children. I'll tear him apart." "And that's exactly what he wants," Alara said, not flinching in the face of Knox's fury. She stepped forward and faced him head-on, gray eyes locked with his fire. "He wants you to lose control. He wants you to act without thinking. He wants you to make a mistake so he has an excuse to strike. Don't let him win, Knox." Knox stared at her, breathing hard, fists still clenched. "You don't understand. This is my world. If I don't respond, he'll think I'm weak, and the others will follow him." "I do understand," Alara replied, her voice softer but still unyielding. "I understand you have to protect your position, but you don't have to do it by walking into his trap. You're smarter than that, Knox. You're stronger than that." She lifted a hand and pressed it to his chest, feeling the wild heartbeat beneath. "Think about the girls. Think about what happens if you die in a war you started while you were angry." Knox looked over Alara's shoulder and saw Violet crying quietly, her small hand gripping Luna's shirt, and Luna, standing there with a calm that felt almost unnatural, her gray eyes still full of worry as she watched him. She wasn't crying, She wasn't panicking. But Knox could see the fear she was trying to hide. He drew in a deep breath, forcing the rage burning inside him to cool. "Fine," he said at last, his voice still tight as wire. "We won't attack, not yet. But Tristan, double security. I want bodyguards on the girls 24/7, but discreet, so they don't feel caged. And find the leak who fed Castellano information. I want to know who it is." Tristan nodded and moved fast, disappearing from the room. Knox dropped to his knees in front of his daughters and pulled both into his arms. "No one is going to hurt you," he whispered. "I promise. I'll protect you at any cost." 2 weeks after the threatening box incident, after Tristan had found and dealt with the mole, after security had been tightened to the maximum while still kept discreet enough that the girls didn't feel suffocated, Knox decided it was time for Luna and Violet to go back to school. He couldn't keep them at home forever, and both girls missed their friends, missed their classrooms, missed the normal life they deserved. But Knox didn't relax for a second. He positioned 2 guards to watch from a distance, their car parked near the school gate, always ready to intervene if anything looked wrong. He also drilled the girls carefully. Don't go with strangers for any reason. Don't leave the school grounds until you see Dad's car or Tristan arriving to pick you up. And if anything happens, call Dad immediately. Luna listened to every instruction with the seriousness of an adult, nodding after each point. She even asked Knox for his personal number. Not an assistant's line or an office number, but the number he always carried on him. Knox gave her a small phone that could only call and text, with his number already saved as number 1. The first day back went smoothly. The second day did too. By the third day, Knox began to breathe again, thinking maybe Castellano had backed off after the intimidation attempt didn't work. He was wrong. That afternoon, just as the final bell rang, Luna and Violet walked out toward the gate like they always did, eyes searching for Tristan's familiar black car, but the car wasn't there yet. Maybe stuck in traffic somewhere. The girls waited inside the school grounds, near the gate but still behind the fence, exactly the way their father had told them to. A man approached them, wearing a black suit and sunglasses, a friendly smile on his face. "Hello, girls," he said, voice warm and trustworthy. "Your dad sent me to pick you up. Tristan's car broke down on the road, so your dad asked me to bring you home." Violet looked at the man with innocent trust, starting to step forward because he seemed polite, and he knew Tristan's name. But Luna tightened her grip on her sister's hand and pulled her back. "Dad never sends strangers to pick us up," Luna said, calm, but her eyes locked on the man with sharp caution. "If Tristan's car broke down, Dad would come himself or he'd call us first." The man kept smiling, but something changed in his eyes, a quick flash of cold. "You're smart, but your dad is very busy and couldn't call in time. Come on, get in the car, it's late." He took another step and reached toward Violet. Luna immediately shoved her sister behind her while her other hand slipped into her pocket and pulled out the small phone, pressing number 1. She didn't raise it to her ear. She just held it in her palm, hoping Knox would hear. "We're not going anywhere," Luna said loudly enough for the phone to catch her voice. "We'll wait here until Dad comes to get us. You're not Dad's man." On the other end, Knox was in the middle of an important meeting when his phone buzzed. He saw Luna's name and snatched it up, his heart slamming. He heard his daughter's voice, heard the words stranger, heard the tension underneath that controlled calm. He didn't need to hear more. Knox overturned his chair as he stood, storming out of the meeting like a hurricane. "Tristan, the school, now!" he shouted into his other phone as he pounded down the stairs. He didn't wait for the elevator, didn't wait for extra guards. He threw himself into the back of the armored SUV, while Tristan slammed the vehicle into gear, tires screeching as they tore away. 5 minutes. They reached the school in 5 minutes, Tristan weaving the heavy vehicle through traffic with lethal precision, blowing past every limit and running 3 red lights. When he skidded to a stop at the gate with tires screaming, he saw the stranger trying to grab Violet's arm while Luna screamed and yanked her sister back. What happened next took only seconds. Knox lunged like a predator, seized the man by the collar, and hurled him away from his daughters. At the same time, the secondary team of guards in the follow-up car arrived, surrounding the would-be kidnapper before he could even think of escaping. Knox didn't care about the man anymore. He left him to Tristan and turned to his daughters, dropping to his knees and pulling them both into his arms with a desperation he didn't try to hide. "Are you okay? Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you?" "We're okay, Dad," Violet sobbed, clinging to Knox. "I was so scared, but Luna protected me." Knox turned to Luna, about to speak, but she threw her arms around him before he could. Luna, 7 years old, the girl who'd never hugged him first, who'd never called him dad, was holding on like she was afraid he might vanish. "I knew you'd come," Luna whispered into his shoulder, her voice shaking for the first time since Knox met her. "You promised. You said you'd always be there when I needed you, and you kept your promise." Knox felt his eyes burn, and then tears spilled free. He, Knox Mercer, the coldest Mafia boss in Chicago, was crying at the gate of an elementary school, holding his 2 little daughters in his arms. "Dad," Violet looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Are you crying?" Knox laughed through the tears and held them tighter. "These are happy tears, sweetheart, because my girls are safe. And because Luna called me Dad for the first time." Luna didn't say anything. She only held on a little tighter. And Knox knew, in that moment, he had truly become a father. That night, after the girls had fallen into deep sleep within the safe arms of the house, after Tristan reported that the kidnapper had confessed he worked for Castellano and was being held for interrogation, Knox sat alone in his study, staring at the open safe in front of him. Inside, alongside important documents and cash, was a small red velvet box he'd kept for 7 years. He took the box out, lifted the lid, and watched the diamond catch the lamplight. The ring he'd bought to propose to Alara 9 years ago. The ring that had never been given because she disappeared before he could ever drop to one knee. A soft knock made him lift his head. Alara stood in the doorway, dark brown hair falling over her shoulders, gray eyes fixed on him with a determination he'd never seen in her before. "I need to talk to you," she said. Knox nodded, closed the velvet box, and slipped it into his jacket pocket before Alara could see it. She stepped into the room, shut the door behind her, and faced him. "Today, when you called about what happened at the school," Alara began, her voice trembling slightly, "I thought I was going to die from fear. I imagined every worst thing that could happen to the girls, and I realized something." She paused and took a deep breath. "I realized that no matter how many times I run, no matter how hard I try to live a normal life, danger will still find me. Raymond found me when I was pregnant. Castellano found the girls even after we tried to protect them. The truth is, there's no place that's truly safe. There's no life without risk." Knox watched her, waiting. "But what I also realized," Alara continued, her eyes beginning to shine with tears, "is that when you showed up at the school in 5 minutes, when you held the girls and cried in front of them, I saw that the thing I'd feared for 7 years was completely wrong. You aren't the danger, Knox. You're the protection. You're home. You're the man I fell in love with 9 years ago, and I never stopped loving you no matter how hard I tried." She stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest the way she had on the balcony the night before. "I don't want to run anymore, Knox. I'd rather face danger beside you than live safely alone. I'd rather be in your world, with all its darkness and its threats, than live a life without you." She looked straight into his eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. And I want to be with you, if you still want me." Knox didn't speak. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out the red velvet box, and slowly went down on one knee in front of Alara. She stood there, eyes wide with shock as he opened the lid and revealed the glittering diamond inside. "This ring," Knox said, his voice rough with emotion. "I bought it 9 years ago. I was going to propose to you on the night you saw me do what I did. I kept it for 7 years while you were gone, never once thinking of giving it to anyone else, because it belongs only to you. It has always belonged only to you." He lifted his gaze to hers, blue-gray eyes full of love and pain and hope. "Alara Sinclair, will you marry me? Not because of the girls, not because of protection, but because I love you. I've loved you for 9 years, and I'll love you until the day I die," Alara cried, tears pouring freely, but on her lips was the brightest smile Knox had ever seen. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." Knox slid the ring onto her finger, then rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her as if 7 years of distance were dissolving in that single moment. And in the weeks that followed, Knox handled Castellano not with guns or violence, but with information and the connections he'd built through his career. Evidence of Castellano's money laundering was delivered to the FBI anonymously, and within 3 weeks, Knox's greatest enemy was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison. No blood, no war, only justice. And Knox's family was finally safe. The wedding took place on a spring afternoon in the back garden of the mansion, where cherry blossoms were in full bloom and sunlight slipped through the branches, scattering shimmering ribbons of light like something out of a fairy tale. There weren't hundreds of guests, there wasn't press, and there wasn't any showy spectacle. There were only the people closest to them, Tristan standing as best man, a few of Alara's old college friends she'd reconnected with after everything finally settled, and, most important of all, their two little daughters in pure white dresses, holding rose petal baskets, walking ahead of their mother across the lush green lawn. Luna and Violet were the flower girls, sprinkling petals down the aisle with radiant smiles. Violet practically skipped, swinging her basket with delighted energy, while Luna walked with solemn care, her gray eyes sparkling with a happiness she couldn't hide. When Alara appeared in a wedding dress that was simple but elegant, Knox felt time stop.